Welcome to the podcast, where something is amiss, something is a mess, and we'll discuss some things MS, multiple sclerosis. This podcast is meant to tell the stories of those living day to day with MS, from before they were diagnosed, getting that diagnosis, the aftermath, and where they are today in their journey with multiple sclerosis. And now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to Some Things MS.
And welcome back to Some Things MS, a podcast where we've been talking about kind of the messiness around multiple sclerosis. And I'm really excited today to have on Meg Stenson, who I've known for quite a bit and has been involved with the local MS bike ride here in Colorado. And welcome, Meg.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you called me about this. I'm
Me too.
excited.
Yeah, so we'll just quickly start. Just give us a little bit about you from a personal side, then we'll dig into the MS stuff.
Yeah. Originally from Dayton, Ohio, believe it or not, and found my way in Colorado in the early 90s. And I've been in the area of K-12 education since then. Done everything from teaching to coaching people to being a elementary assistant principal and worked for Denver Public Schools for quite some time doing some innovation work for them. And now, kind of after COVID, got out of being in schools and doing some consulting. Have a blended family of kids that Jeff and I put together with five kids. And they're kind of ranging from, let's see, what oldest is 32 and the youngest is 24.
Yeah.
So they're scattered all over, off on their own. And so I'm doing the consulting now, hanging out a lot with my dog, hiking, biking, skiing in the winter. So all those fun things, playing a lot of pickleball.
Awesome. Yeah, pickleball is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, you can't drive by. It used to be able to get on the tennis court because I played tennis every once in a while. Now it's like
Nope, it's all pickleball.
all pickleball. Yep. You better
All
get there.
pickleball
Better
all
get there
the
4 in
time.
the morning and just like start defending a court so you can play some
I
tennis.
know. And the sound is like making people crazy
I
too.
know. I keep hearing that it's like some outdoor places are shutting pickleball out
Yeah.
because of that, right? Is it
Yeah.
because
Some of the
is it
parks
because
in
the
Denver.
paddles are harder? Or like what's the is it
Yeah.
just
So it's like a hard paddle and then
okay.
it's like almost like a wiffle ball. So when it
Okay.
hits it, it makes like a ping.
Okay.
So if you live next to a park where they're playing a lot of pickleball, I can imagine that it would
Yeah,
be a
just
little
gets to you.
annoying.
Um, so a couple of things, just as you went through your personal side, it's just interesting. I've always, as a side career thought over the course of my life, I've thought, man, I really would be fun to be an educator at the level of like kindergarten through like fifth to sixth grade. Just feels like a fun time when kids are formulating thoughts and just to be a part of that is kind of cool. Plus everybody's as tall as I am at that point. Like getting to the next level for me, like in high school, like when the kids are bigger than me, it's like I got a whole other thing to deal with now. So at least I can beat these kids up if I need to.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say, I mean, I was always elementary and early childhood. And so the most of my years in an actual classroom was kindergarten
Yeah,
and just loved it.
yeah,
It's kind of the same thing, you always kind of go back to that. Everything you need to know, you learned in kindergarten. And it
exactly.
really is true.
And the energy at that point too is like the energy's still like just hopping. Like I mean, again, middle school kids and high school kids are great, but the energy is different. And this
Mhm.
like little kid energy is like you're feeding off of that like a vampire. Like yeah, I
Yep.
need this in my life just to stay
Yeah.
young.
And they're so excited to come to school every day.
Right,
The
exactly.
middle
Yeah.
school and high school kids are like, oh, I have to go to school.
Cross that line, that bridge of like I don't want to do this
In
anymore.
kindergarten, they're still so excited.
Yeah. And the second thing, we've talked a little bit about this, I'm sure, but I'll remind you, my company where I work now is headquartered out of Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah,
So
I
I
know you.
travel there. I travel there all the time. So I definitely need to find out your top two things, three things to do in Dayton. I've done a lot. Like I drive around when I visit cities, so I've done that in Dayton and just kind of
Yeah,
tooled the town and looked for fun things and art and
yeah.
shops and stuff to go hang out in.
Well, my mother is 88 and still in Dayton, Ohio,
Right
and
on.
she has been a huge supporter, volunteer of the Dayton Foundation, which supports all the arts. And
Cool.
it's really quite remarkable. I mean, obviously, my mom's has done a lot for it, so I'm more engaged with it. But
Yeah.
the level of talent of the arts in a small town such as Dayton, Ohio,
Yeah.
is really remarkable. So
I'm always impressed at, some of the smaller towns I've been in over the course of my travels where it's just you just, they're unique in their own little way, and
yeah.
a lot of, like I said, a lot of talent there that's kind of undiscovered.
Yeah. Well, and you would love to, Bobby, with your interest in theater and all. Years ago, a woman there started an organization called the Muse Machine, which was about getting young kids
Yeah.
involved in not only just being in theater, but getting them involved in being, being patrons of the arts and going to the arts and learning about the Philharmonic and the opera and the theater and dance and how to be a member of the audience and
Yeah.
how to appreciate it. And a lot of it was seeing kind of a dying age of audience members in the arts.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable organization. Years later, they touch almost 100,000 kids in the whole Denver metro
Wow.
area every year.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe
Cool.
you'll have to catch a show when you're in Dayton.
That's one thing I haven't done yet. I've been there, and I usually I'm there for work, so I've got a lot of work, things to do. But and if I'm doing something, it's like on the way out to the airport, I'll stop at this store, or I'll stop at this, piece of art installation somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I'll definitely have to try to get to a show when I'm out there at some point. Because like I said, I go at least twice, sometimes 3 times a year, to visit for different things. So.
There you go. Maybe even more than I'd go.
At this point, that's funny. Yeah. Well, definitely. I'll tell you what to do next time. It's like, hey, if you haven't seen this place.
Exactly.
um,
So,
cool. Well, again, appreciate you being on to talk about multiple sclerosis. Um, so your husband Jeff Brown, whom I met through the MS ride. I'd known you much prior, kind of prior to that. We had your kids were in theater. I was doing musical theater, so I definitely had met you earlier on, but I can't remember the year that you and Mark Musselman and Jeff rode the bike ride with
yeah.
the Coneheads, or at least hung out with the Coneheads. So we got to meet you.
Yeah.
It was probably 2014 or 15ish, somewhere in that range, maybe.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm thinking it was about then. Yeah.
yeah. So Jeff Brown, your husband, had MS. Did you know about MS before you met Jeff, or was it something you learned about when you married him, or is it kind of in between? Just kind of
Yeah.
talk about how you became aware of multiple sclerosis.
Yeah. So I actually was back in my 20s. I was dating a guy named Bill, who I later married, and my three kids with last name of Stenson are his children. And when I started dating Bill, it was the late 80s, early 90s, and we were in New York, and his mom had MS. And
Okay.
that was actually the first I'd ever heard of it. And
Yeah.
Bill was he was a avid cyclist, runner, hiker, like do everything crazy. So his avid cycling, therefore I was dating him, so I had to become an avid cyclist.
Right.
And so he had at that time it was the MS 150,
Okay.
and we did it in Pennsylvania and upstate New York and Ohio. And his mom was diagnosed when he was in college, and she was like 45 years old when she was diagnosed.
Wow, that's a
And
pretty late diagnosis too.
yeah, and at that time my memory of the whole thing, because I don't really remember, what all she was doing, but my memory was she got really into swimming, and
Okay.
somewhere back at that time there was still if you have MS, you need to keep moving. You just need to keep moving. And so she got really into swimming, and she swam very regularly. I I don't think there were actually any medications at that time, and I also don't know what kind of MS she had,
Yeah.
but we would, I would see her, I knew her, and so we were, big into the cycling, raising money for the MS. And when we moved out to Colorado, I think it was maybe 93, we did and I think it might've still been the MS 150 then, but I remember in Colorado, we were in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And I think we stayed at Colorado College, if I have all my memories right about it. But so I knew about MS, and I remember just being like, wow, like, because she was probably late 50s. She ended up in a wheelchair, and then she died in her late 60s from MS
Yeah.
complications.
Yeah.
And
So she likely then had a progressive form. If it was remitting relapsing, that rarely crosses over
yeah,
into progressive. So likely she started with either a primary or secondary progressive that, depending on the timing.
yeah, yeah. And I don't remember a lot of like huge amounts of support, but then again, I mean, I didn't live in the same town as she did.
Yeah.
I don't remember those kinds of things. So then when I met Jeff in 2005, I knew of MS, but I met him, and he had not been diagnosed with MS at that point.
Okay.
And he was a big cyclist because he was a throat cancer survivor.
Okay.
And he had been a big avid golfer prior to the throat cancer, and then kind of his neck and all kind of left him in a place where golf wasn't great. And somebody gave him a bike, and they were like, you need to get on a bike. And,
Yeah.
it was like kind of at the time of like, all about the bike and, those Lance days.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
He got really into that, and he got really into cycling. And so when I, met him, and he was really into cycling, and I had been from previous. So we started biking a lot, and we did, I think we did Ride the Rockies. I was looking back before this podcast. I think we did it 8 times. We did
Wow. Yeah.
Rockies. Yeah, we did Pedal the Plains. And of course we did the Bike MS ride.
Right.
Just more as a ride and support MS. And he knew that, my former husband's mom had MS. And so we, did it that way. And
You did the Bike MS ride with Jeff before he was diagnosed then.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And Courage Classic, and I don't know, all those rides, Tour of the Moon, and all of it. And it was more about finding fun rides. So we had different causes and things like that. And he was into cycling. Jeff was also an avid skier. He had raced on his college ski team, and then got out to Colorado and was like, this big, like, loving skiing and the whole bit. And he was a pediatrician, and he had been the head of pediatrics at Denver Health. And then in 2008, they were staffing the hospital up in Vail because they were having trouble staffing it. And so Denver Health was kind of staffing it. So he took a position up there, and we had this blended family at that time of 5 kids. And I'm like, we cannot move to Vail. So we did a lot of like driving back and forth.
I was just about to ask, like, how is it, like a daily commute, or
no, he would do like
stay in a hospital bed for a couple nights?
He would do like, he got a condo up there.
Yeah.
And then he would do these like 3 and 4 day shifts.
Yeah.
And then he'd come back here. And during the winter, I was like taking the kids up every weekend, and they were all skiing. And, Jeff was in heaven because everybody was skiing. And so it was just his greatest thing that could happen. And in the summer, we were up there and everyone was biking, and he was just like, this is great. And, when I met him in 2005, like, it was hard to imagine that he was a throat cancer survivor because his amount of energy was just crazy. I mean, the nurses would say that the moms would come into the hospital and say, I want to see the tall doctor who speaks Spanish and is racing around the hospital.
Right. So energetic. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, super energetic. And as I look back on it now, maybe there were a few times that he was kind of like, oh, I'm getting tired, I'm getting older or whatever.
Yeah.
But I never noticed anything, and I don't think he did. And then he was one day in 2010, he was driving back down from Vail in the summer, and he got double vision.
Ooh,
and he pulled over and waited for it to pass. and then went to see his eye doctor, and his eye doctor's like, you need to see a neurologist. And I would say his diagnosis of MS was probably as shocking to the neurologist as it was to Jeff and myself, just because the neurologist was somebody he knew, who was a friend,
Yeah.
and he knew Jeff. And I think he also was like, where are the symptoms?
Hmm. So his
Um,
only symptom initially was just the double vision.
yeah,
Okay.
that's all that there was. And so I think he was shocked by it, and being a doctor and whatever, just wanting to research everything, he just dug into all the research about it.
I was
And
going to ask how just being, I talked to another gentleman who was in nursing, very similar, like just kind of you're already kind of in the field. Like, how does that change your approach to getting a diagnosis like throat cancer, obviously, or now MS? Like, what's that look like for Jeff? So he's diving right in.
everything he could read about it, everything he knew. He talked to everybody. He talked to you. He talked to all kinds of people who had it. And so was pretty thoughtful. If I remember correctly, at that time there were the two drugs I remember, and it might have been the only two drugs that were out there, were Copaxone and what's the other one? Tecfidera, I think.
And there were
Yeah,
a couple. There's Avonex and there's Rebif, which are a couple other ones. And they may have been moving in and out. Like, I definitely don't know the
yeah,
timelines. But when I was diagnosed, which was 2004 or five, there were three options for me. It was Copaxone, there was Rebif, and then Avonex, I think it was what it was called. And
okay,
again, they were all very similar. They were all injectable. They were all
yeah,
interferons that were pretty powerful and dangerous with side effects
yeah.
and what have you. So
Yeah.
definitely a different landscape for what was available. And by 2010, I'm not sure much
I
had changed.
remember.
It was still still a lot of research going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Infura, yeah, the injectable, and so I don't know if he was on. I know for sure he was on Copaxone, and then the Tecfidera rings a bell, and
Yeah.
so I,
Yeah.
I don't know if he switched to it at some point, but he was, he had the relapsing remitting, and I remember he was very thoughtful about if he was going to take the medication, and really weighed out the whole
Yeah.
thoughts of side effects and things like that. And unfortunately, like I do know one of his frustrations was, he still had like side effects from throat cancer, and there wasn't anybody to really kind of talk about all of it and how does it
Mm,
all go together. So I feel like
yeah.
that was a lot on him,
Yeah.
trying to sort all that out. But he made a decision, like, this is the way I'm going to go. I'm going to do the medication, and I'm going to dive into the exercise even more regularly than I was.
Yeah.
And he had a bike trainer, but he set up his bike trainer, and just got very almost more rigid with making sure he was exercising. And he met with a nutritionist, I remember, about trying to change his diet, which was a little complicated for him because one of the things from the radiation caused a little more struggle with swallowing. And
Yeah.
so, they would suggest lots of fruits and vegetables. And he's like, yeah, I can, but I have to put tons of salad dressing on them to get things to go down, kind of
Gotcha.
thing. And,
Yeah.
so he did it. I don't know if he was great about changing his diet, but he tried.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a tough thing, but it's an important one, I think, with MS too. I think there's certainly a lot of indication that based on where people with MS reside and where they don't reside, where you have pockets where people don't have MS predominantly, and the diets that those folks typically eat, there's kind of overwhelming evidence that diet does make a difference.
I think definitely. And he said, I mean, the nutritionist he talked to and everything he read too, he was like,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to do the whole package, and you've got to, figure that out. And so, at first he was doing this, he's like taking and I was like, wow, this drug's working great because you have like no
I was
symptoms.
going to ask, so he had the double vision. What other symptoms, if any, cropped up?
From about 2010 till I would say 2015, maybe he was occasionally tired. I
Wow. Okay.
think for Jeff, like getting for me, I I don't have the symptoms. I don't feel anything. It's not in my body. And so I'm just taking his cues, but I
Yeah.
know because we used to talk a lot, like it was totally on his mind. It was
Yeah.
it was in the back of his head, like, okay, when am I going to all of a
That's
sudden have a symptom? Like,
that,
when am I going to get double vision again? Or when am I going to stumble and fall? Or, whatever it
that's
was.
the scary, uncertain part, I think, for a lot of folks with MS. It was some diseases you kind of know it's right there in front of you. You kind of know what to expect.
Mhm.
With a neurological disease, you have no freaking idea. It's like, it's like you see, like you see, you be going along, and all of a sudden, a stressor or who knows what, you're back, and you not only is your double vision back, but you've created, or your body has, offered up some brand new symptoms that you didn't
Yeah.
have before, that you're having to deal with now going forward. So yeah, it's always, like you said, that's been consistent for me, and it's always interesting to hear when other people, what's on top of mind for them. That Jeff has, had that same
Yeah.
kind of, it's like I just never know. So here I am, just kind of, it's on my mind. I try not to think about it, but there it is.
Right. And we would try to plan, like upcoming events, like, yeah, like go do the bike MS ride this year. And he was always kind of like, is this going to be the year that I
That was the
can't do it?
scariest thing for me. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
is going to be the year that I in the middle of the ride, like, overexert or something, and
Hmm.
trying to
Yeah.
balance out the drive in me, and the the hard-headedness, maybe, like, just to be like, I don't want to let this disease direct my life, but I also don't want to create an issue where I can't, maybe I get a lot worse or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think too, and I'm sure, we would go to different events. I remember one time there was a bike MS walk over in City Park, and we went over, and it's very sobering when you see people in wheelchairs, and you see,
Yeah.
people who are living with the same disease that he was living with. And he would, you know, because at that time, still like no symptoms, kind of going about his life, like,
Yeah.
wow, do I really have this? Did
I asked myself that question all the time, because sometimes I had typical symptoms, but I felt good enough that I was doing bike rides, and, pretty much, moving on normally, especially early on. But I would ask my neurologist, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah, let me pull up your MRI again, show you all the little spots where you have lesions. You definitely have it." Yeah.
well, and being married to Jeff, I would be like, are you sure you have this? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be like, wow, those drugs are amazing
Yeah. Yeah.
what they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was a really, I think that was a definitely, all of it was much harder on him than it was on me.
Yeah.
And I think he thought so much about, like, am I going to be able to keep doing my job? And his job was, at that time, I mean, he was on call at night,
Mm.
and, he was like, what if I can't get up and go? I don't
Yeah.
know. And so that was a very, I think it's such an interesting disease too, because you have it, he wasn't having symptoms, and it was still such a stress in his life
Yeah.
because it was in the back of his mind always.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was really hard. And then I would say probably starting late 2016 is when he started getting the fatigue, really started hitting him. And I
Yeah.
think maybe leading up to it, it was a little bit more, but I think he was able to, and he used to just kind of write it off a little bit more, like, oh, I'm getting older.
There's that I always think about. Is like, is it MS now, or is it just I'm also,
Yeah.
above 50, or, now
Yeah.
above 55?
Yeah.
What's the contributing factor to this now?
And what is all that? And I think that was I think looking back, he was kind of like, oh, yeah, maybe that's what was really happening. But certainly by early 2017, the fatigue, he was definitely having to kind of make adjustments. Like if he
Mm.
was going to have a big weekend, of activity, he had to think through that. He couldn't, the idea of doing like a ride the Rockies of a day after day after day of riding, he was like, I'll be spent.
Yeah.
And so had to start thinking a little bit more, or even just like if we were going to do some kind of a big activity like ski all day or bike all day or something like that, then that night he wasn't going to also be able to go out. Like,
Right.
he
Do
was,
the whole nighttime, to 3 in the morning kind of thing, right? That you're used to. Yeah.
yeah. And
Did
so
that do you mind, did that affect him like mentally? Like, was that a problem for him?
it was,
Or like, at some point, I felt I've been able to rectify it, so it doesn't bother me as much as it maybe did in the beginning, where it's like I was disappointed or harder on myself. Whereas now I allow myself more grace in that. It's like, hey, I know, if I do a big thing, that the next day I've got to have some recovery time, and that's okay. I've got to just that's part of the deal now.
yeah, really hard at the beginning,
Yeah.
really hard. And, I think, I think he tried to give himself grace, after a bit of time, but it was hard. It was
Yeah.
really hard. And I think, just having been that full of energy, running around,
Yeah.
and I remember me trying to be the person to understand, because not having MS, understanding the fatigue of MS is it's not just somebody being tired, because like I'm tired and I go and take a nap and I feel better. And he's like, I can sleep all night and be just as tired when I wake
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
as when I went to bed.
Yep.
And so it was such an interesting thing for me to have to kind of really try to understand and appreciate. And I think there's a lot that, not if you don't live with the person, that you have no idea what they're going through.
Yeah.
It's a very and for Jeff, having his biggest symptom being fatigue, people don't see it.
Yeah.
So he could be out and about or out at a event and seeing people, and I mean, he certainly doesn't look like he has MS.
Yeah.
So it's almost like an invisible disease that you're sitting with.
Right. That's so common. People's like, well, you just don't look sick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like one of the number one things people will tell you, like the most annoying things to hear is like, oh yeah, but you don't look sick.
Right.
Or if you say, what's like, just back to what you said, what's your symptoms? Oh, I get fatigue. Oh, I get tired too.
Yeah. We're all getting older.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah, it's like, yeah, it's just I tend not to dive into those anymore, just because it's hard to bring people around to the mindset that they really understand,
Yeah.
kind of where you're coming from. And when Jeff would go out, would he would to your point, was he still like ramping himself up and bringing the energy, and then like really crashing hard? So again, people wouldn't know. It's like, man, it's Jeff. He's doing the same thing he's always done. He's out there. He's energetic. He's lively. He's
Yeah.
bringing the conversation, and then
And then
he
would
goes
just
home. It's
like,
like boom.
yeah. And well, what he would do is, the classic famous Irish goodbye.
Yeah,
Jeff would just disappear. And I'd
yeah,
always be like, people would be like, where'd Jeff go? I'm like, not sure. And
yeah,
literally, like, I mean, I remember us having events here. So Jeff grew up with his dad's best friend being a guy who married a woman from Puerto Rico. So he had this whole connection to Puerto Rico and a big, huge family in Puerto Rico.
yeah,
And he spoke fluent Spanish, and he did some of his rotations in medicine in Puerto Rico. And the Puerto Rican aunt was his inspiration to become a pediatrician, that she was also. So he would, have these big parties here. He'd make a big paella. He loved to make paella. We had these huge paella pans, and, with Spanish or Puerto Rican music playing, and Jeff would be speaking Spanish, and we have these big paella parties, and, maybe 20, 25 people here. And all of a sudden Jeff would just be gone, and they're at our house. And I was like, people were like, where'd Jeff go? And I'd be like, to bed.
yeah,
And he would just slip away. But up until that moment, it's just what you said. He brought all the energy. It was like, the whole thing. And
Yeah.
it's, it's how we got our team name, which is kind of jumping to the team name, but the Bike MS, our team is El Equipo and Fuego, which means the team on fire. Because anytime Jeff got ready to do something, big, like full of energy, he'd always be like, "En fuego, en fuego." And, it was just, he had a t-shirt that said like "En fuego."
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd get ready to do a big ski run and he'd be like, "En fuego." And so when we got ready to name the team in his memory, I was like, we got to be the team on fire. We got to be in fuego.
I love that. Yeah, it's a great homage to such a yeah, just a lovely thing for somebody just to use as their kind of catchphase in life. Just in
Exactly.
fuego. Yeah, just
Yeah.
on fire. I love
Yeah,
it.
let's go. Let's go. So that was always his thing. And so yeah, it was interesting because he would just have this fatigue thing. Um and so just get up and one thing he was kind of able to do because of doing basically shift work and a lot of it up in Vale at our condo is like myself and 5 kids weren't up there too. He was by himself a lot of the time
Yeah.
until we would come up for the weekend. And so he could work, he could nap, he could kind of, do his thing. And then when he was in Denver, he wasn't working. So I'd go off to work and everybody would go off about their day and he could have really low key chill days.
That's good. Yeah.
And that kind of the way he got around it, I
Yeah.
think. And as you said too, and the reason that people were like, he doesn't seem sick,
Yeah.
and the going to bed early was, oh, well, we're all getting older.
Yeah. He wasn't shy about talking about his diagnosis, so people knew he had MS, or was it really not a part of?
He talked about it, but I think he did, but not a ton. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't the way Jeff had a lot of really close friends, and so he would talk one-on-one with close friends, but
Yeah.
at any kind of big social gathering, he wouldn't talk about it.
Yeah. No, I'm very similar. I mean, I get not afraid to talk about it. If somebody asks, I'll talk all day about it. I'm happy to
Mhm.
share and spread anything I've learned or you know some
Yeah.
person might find, which is why I started these podcasts. I didn't want to, I'm not afraid to talk about this kind of stuff, but I also don't want to be face forward like every time I go somewhere. Like, remember everybody, I've got MS. I might
Yeah.
sit down or
Yeah. Yeah.
or I might do an Irish goodbye just because I've got MS, or whatever it is. Just kind of let it
Exactly.
happen as it happens. And again,
Yeah.
if somebody asks, I just don't. I also not not interested in being the center of attention on that
Mhm.
as a again a facing forward piece of my
Yeah.
personality or what have you.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like I think Jeff, and I wonder if you feel like this too, like it's more of a one-on-one conversation in the sense that it's complicated.
Yeah,
It's it's not I don't know about other diseases out there, but it's complicated. And
yeah.
two MS diagnoses don't look the same.
That's I mean I was talking to somebody and it's happened to me a couple of times where I'll find like a kindred spirit where I've got actually do have such a similar journey. Like, oh, I had that, mine was like that, oh, I had
Mhm.
that, it's like so like you said, those one-on-one conversations and generally the most impactful ones are people who have deep connection to MS, like
Yeah.
yourself or somebody who has MS, because
Mhm.
you're just
Mhm.
you kind of know all the ins and outs and the ups and downs, and it you do get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to talk to people who have such a different journey. I've learned so much just in the short time I've been doing these to hear about everybody's kind of like you said, the differences in the way that they've been affected by this
Yeah.
neurological disease.
Yeah. Complicated one,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked about this. You weren't afraid to share. Jeff passed away. What year was that? I know
And he
it's been.
passed away in January of 2019.
Yeah.
And so leading up, probably 2018 was definitely one of his hardest years of having MS. There were much more fatigue, and still kind of at that time, like maybe what he thought was his only um, big symptom. He came home one time and said somebody had said he was slurring his speech.
Mm.
Um, I think for me, I got really I've tried to really pay attention to that because, you live with somebody, you're married to somebody, you're with them,
Yeah.
and little things I felt like I didn't notice as much as maybe somebody who maybe hadn't seen him for a bit.
Yeah.
And so I did kind of notice that maybe it was a little bit more slurring his speech. But the big thing that happened in 2018 was his swallowing issues got significantly worse.
Yeah.
And he went back to some different doctors regarding because what he had always been told was that was all related to the radiation from his throat cancer
Right.
because that's when he first had some issues with swallowing. And it kind of went in phases. It felt like he had it a little bit right after he had throat cancer and then he kind of got into a routine of what, just maybe putting some more dressing, like always drinking water when you're
Yeah.
eating, kinds of things like that. And but for some reason in 2018, he was really struggling and he went to a number of different doctors and they're like, yeah, it's kind of, we can there were some different surgeries they were going to maybe try with his vocal cords and he didn't really want to do that. They didn't have good outcomes necessarily
Yeah.
always. And but definitely that was more forefront
Yeah.
and but in I'm pretty sure in his head and I know in my head was that was all throat cancer radiation complications.
Yeah.
And then the way Jeff actually passed away was he choked
Mm.
and he was home by himself and I wasn't home yet. And so there's no one to do a Heimlich or anything. And so I've ever since then, I really went with Jeff had MS and it was complicating his life, but he didn't die of MS.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of thinking that up until it's kind of crazy, but last year on the bike MS ride, our team finished and a bunch of the people on my team had to leave. And so there were just 3 or 4 of us. And so we ended up going into the VIP tent at the end.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a guy who had MS and he comes and does rides all around the country. He was from back east. And so he was asking me about our team. And, there's a little story you have to, because people look at the team and they're like, there's got to
Right.
be a story there.
Right. Yeah.
El Equipo and Fuego.
Yeah.
And so I was telling him and I was telling him about Jeff. And I said, he had MS, but he didn't die of MS. He, had it was complicating his life, but that wasn't thing. And he's like, well, how did he die? And I told him he choked and he was like, swallowing is a huge MS
Yeah.
symptom. And it was really surprising to me because I don't, Jeff and I had never talked about it being that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just because he headed down a path of his throat cancer was the swallowing and didn't
Yeah.
kind of kept it separate than his MS. But 4 years later, that was the first I had heard of it. And
Yeah.
since in the last year, talked to a lot of MS people who are like, yeah, swallowing's definitely an issue.
I just want to step back and say I was heartbroken when I found out Jeff had passed because I'd just gotten to know him pretty well over the course of I think when his like you said in 2018 when things started to get a little more a little more difficult, he had reached out a couple of times and we had some chats and I yeah, again, got to learn about what a incredible person he was, and so hearing that it was so my condolences even this even though I was at his I know a lot of stories about the port because I was at his service which was just lovely just a great
Yeah.
commemoration but when
And
I
then
was
the Puerto
diagnosed
Ricans got up and wouldn't
yeah
stop talking.
it was awesome. I mean, I love that celebration of life. I hope that's the way it goes for most people because it's just a beautiful way to honor somebody.
Yeah.
Um, but when I was diagnosed, I much like Jeff, I was I wasn't in the medical profession, but just an avid person who just like I just dig in. I want to know and learn, and so I did. I found out that a high school classmate of mine also had MS, and he was at a progressive stage, but he basically passed to the same thing. He had swallowing issues, and so it is, one of those things that is. And it's interesting too that you mentioned just that one little snippet where you talked about having somebody that kind of looked at both the throat cancer and the MS together. That in this case, just having that focus on the throat cancer as a possibility for that swallowing, that
Mhm.
threw you off track a little bit. That if maybe there'd been a holistic
Yeah.
view around it, or some some more information that it may not have changed the outcome, but at least
Right.
you had a
Right.
different thought process around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely a different thought process. And I don't know if, I don't know what he would have done differently, but I think
Yeah,
just knowing what knowing your symptom is something different than, I don't know. It
yeah,
just, yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't know if he would have done anything differently, but
yeah,
it definitely, especially in 2018, was
yeah,
getting so much worse.
yeah. So when did you start your team? Was it? I know that it's a team in homage, and
Yeah.
did you start? I can't remember when you started, but was it 2019 that next bike
Yeah.
ride?
So yeah, Jeff died at the end of January in 2019, and it was sudden, it was surprising, it was like there was a lot of just trying to wrap my head around what was going on, and
Yeah,
so when we were putting Celebration of Life together, number of people had encouraged me to say, in lieu of flowers, where would you like some money to go?
yeah,
And it was right at the time, Mark Musselman came over, and he was like, I was like, I want to do a Bike MS team. And we were like, well, let's have people donate to Bike MS and to my team. And so it just kind of, it all happened really fast. It was like, make a team, make a name, get this link out. And
yeah,
so I became a team captain to Bike MS, like, with a full on, like, that expression with a fire hose. It was just like, oh my
yeah,
gosh,
yeah,
what is this? What am I doing? And, that first year, so many people wanted to ride and be on the team in memory of Jeff. And
yeah.
so, I think I had more than 20 people on our team that first year.
That's an awesome first for lots of. I mean, lots of first year teams are starting out with one or two people. Even when you've got somebody,
Yeah.
obviously a testament to who Jeff was and a testament to who you are, and to the folks who wanted to support the cause. But yeah, it's incredible to get a team kicked up that quickly, and
It was incredible, and people who, hadn't ever ridden a bike, and they were like, "I'm gonna get a bike and I'm gonna ride," and it was just, and a little overwhelming for me as a team captain, because
yeah.
people were calling me and asking me questions. I'm like, I don't know."
I mean, like you said, you're just coming off of just kind of just the shock of everything,
Yeah,
with
and
Jeff passing, and
just
then
trying to
having
do
this opportunity to carry on his legacy in a way that's beneficial to so many, and then having to take on a team and the captaincy,
yeah.
being that the person they're looking towards.
Yeah, but such so good for me to just, like, I mean, the amount of support and the amount of love that was
Yeah,
generated through that, and then also just for me to just be part of the Bike MS in such a different way than I had ridden it before,
I was
and
going
to
to ask
really
if it
be,
helped you helped in the healing process, how that
yeah, and to
helped you.
really begin to learn and hear more people's stories who had MS. And, I think, realizing, just so many people, and learning so much more about it, and was such a real healing thing.
Yeah,
And so then, like, the next year I was like, okay, we'll do it again. And so I decided that I'd kick it off on his birthday, because his birthday's in February. And I was like, perfect time to kick off, like, the whole thing. So February of 2020, kick it off again. Started fundraising, like, it was great. And then, ah,
COVID and pandemic shut her down.
yeah, but we still got a big group of people. I think there were still about 15 to 20 of us that rode our own ride that day.
Yeah, cool.
And still were able to, raise quite a bit of money. And so just the progression over the last 5 years of, unfortunately, most teams keep getting bigger. Ours keeps getting smaller, which
It happens for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I've been trying. Last year was our smallest team, I think, but we still raised pretty good money last
Yeah,
year. But
I say you're doing great, like, from your fundraising. I mean, even though it's a small team, your team has been up in the top, 20. You've been in the top 10. Did you make it to the top 10 this year? Or did we
yeah,
talk about this?
yeah,
Oh,
for 2023
yeah,
we did. Yeah.
yeah.
I actually before this I went to pull our numbers to just see so the first year we raised $52,000, which was
Wow.
crazy
That's
because
awesome.
and that was our biggest year, but 2022 we raised 47,000, so that was pretty good. And overall, I just looked at it, and overall, we've raised $182,000 in
Wow.
5 years. So
That's insane. Yeah, I mean, it's such a, huge jump on, teams that have been doing it forever. I mean, it's just,
yeah,
that's a great group of supporters.
yeah, yeah. And it was interesting that first year, as I mentioned, all of our kids, but it was amazing how much they were able to raise, because I think we think sometimes like, young kids. I mean, my son Jack was in college and
Yeah.
he raised a ton of money. And, I think this whole thing of just people being able to make $10, $15 donations
Yeah.
was, they just got a lot of them.
Yeah, I
And
say everybody goes about it slightly differently. Some folks, I mean, there was the one gal that got a $40,000 donation flat out, last year. I don't know if that's something she gets every year, but she got an award at the kickoff meeting. That's like, so that's
wow,
huge, right? That's crazy. Whereas I get,
that's
like I said, I'm getting
insane.
25, 50, 100 here, a couple hundred maybe,
Yeah,
maybe some bigger. But it's like you said, it's a large pool of people with micro donations,
yeah,
and so it's awesome that, like you said, that's incredible for a college age kid
yeah.
to
You
get, because
you
that's
did
that's
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
He
these
raised
kids are not making tons of money. It's
I know, and
they're
that's
in
the
debt at
thing.
this point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was kinda like, give me a week's worth of cups of coffee that you buy, and
right. Yeah, yeah,
and people are like, "Okay."
maybe
And,
one less cocktail on Friday afternoon, guys. You can do it.
exactly. Well, and the thing that's just so, amazing that I've learned over these years too is with every one of those donations, it's another person who gets a better understanding of
Yeah,
MS and what
yeah,
it is. And I think too, I've kind of been somebody who, I've given money to lots of different organizations and things like that. And this one, really dug in a lot more to the money truly makes a difference.
it's
I mean,
incredible. Yeah,
it's incredible. I mean, the amount of just the amount of medications, like the inroads they've made in like pediatric MS
yeah,
in the last, I mean, since Jeff was diagnosed in 2010,
yeah.
the difference is huge, and it's because of fundraising.
Yep. We had a podcast with I was part of a couple research programs at CSU, and after the second one, I just was this year, and I interviewed the research PhD candidate who's running them,
Uh-huh.
and so that episode's out there, and yeah, it's just, I mean, it's
Cool.
cool that it's the research they've done has been 100% funded by the local Colorado MS Society.
Wow.
And this is, really important research in not just, developing medications, but in helping people, live better lives, people who maybe aren't as ambulatory or, have cognitive issues, how they can, study people in different groups to figure out how they can, again, just improve lives over the course of time. So this is,
Yeah.
like you said, what the money we're gathering, it, the largest percentage of it is going to such great programs. It's just
Yeah.
a great track record.
Right. It's so cool. I mean, and I think about like, Jeff had really good insurance, and so the medications were affordable to him.
Yeah,
I mean, he could pay for them. And you think about the number of people who have MS that, those medications haven't been affordable, and the
yeah,
fundraising makes those affordable. He
They don't
had
have the
a
luxury of maybe they don't have the luxury of where Jeff's like, hey, he had the ability to rest when he could,
yeah,
and some folks maybe don't have that. They don't work or push themselves past that level. That it's just it's
yeah.
difficult. Yeah.
Well, and I think about he got a cooling vest one year. I think it was like 2017. We did the bike MS, and then we did it again in 2018. And he had purchased this cooling vest that because
Yeah.
the heat used to really get him,
Yeah.
and and just things like that. That like he was in a position where he could buy a cooling vest, but some people
Yeah.
might not be able to, and so
Exactly. Yeah.
making those kinds of things, like you said, to live a better life,
Yeah.
with MS.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, really such a good cause. And I think, the events just bring more attention to it. I remember, I can't remember the exact year, but Jeff had been diagnosed with MS and we did the big ski MS thing up in Vale.
Okay, that's
Uh,
different. I didn't realize. I know they've done different events like hike, and they did a mud
yeah,
event, like mud, like
yeah. They do a
obstacle
big
course event.
ski one.
And they still do
And
that, or
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
cool.
it was at that time, Billy the Kid was there. He was
Okay.
on Steamboat because he has
Yeah.
MS.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah. That's right.
yeah, and so it was all just, so I think all these events, I mean, I always just look at them as how many more people learn about this disease.
Yeah. And like I said, when once I start talking about it, I find out more. Maybe not the person I'm talking to, but it's like, no, my mother-in-law, my grandmother, my aunt. Just it's rare to find somebody that doesn't know somebody that
Isn't it?
that has
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
had MS. Yeah.
Yeah. And that for me is a huge change than when my husband's mom, when I first learned of her having it. I mean, she might have been the only person I knew who had it.
Yeah.
And now I feel the same as you. Like every time I mention it, somebody knows somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
And good luck on the fundraising. I'm sure I'll see you. I'm. This is awful. I shouldn't admit this on film or whatever we call this. But training is gonna be tough for me. I'm traveling so much, and then when I'm not traveling, it's like the weather is throwing a kink in things, or sometimes my MS says, yeah, I don't think you're gonna be able to bike ride today. you
Yeah.
know. So
Well,
I'm hoping
last
to get out on the
Saturday we
road.
had the snow, and
I
now tomorrow I was supposed to ride, but it says it's going to rain. I don't know.
all day rain on Saturday, and I definitely, for me, it's interesting. The heat doesn't bother me, but it does cold. Like, so for me, like just the opposite. I get cold and I get out of sorts, and then for me, once I get out of sorts, it's the MS symptoms kick
Yeah.
up, and then I'm kind of down
Yeah.
for the count. So so it'll be interesting. So I'm gonna try to squirrel away some training time. I hope to see you, if not on the road beforehand, I'll definitely see you at the event. It's always fun to catch up. That's my favorite part. I get yelled at by my teammates because I'm the last one leaving the rest stops always. It's like, come on,
They're
guy,
like,
we're
"Come
leaving.
on, Bobby,
But I got 20 people left to talk to. You guys go ahead. I'll catch up maybe.
I'll catch you at some point." Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love
So,
seeing all the folks that got to meet or know before I get to the event, obviously.
yeah.
But yeah, we'll put a link to your fundraising in the post when we put it out
Okay.
there, and
Okay.
and
Go,
yeah,
Ellie.
good
Keep
luck.
going, Fuego.
Yeah, you bet. I look forward to seeing you guys, and look forward to seeing you again as well, just in general in life, Meg. Love talking to you.
Same. Love talking to you. Thanks for
Yep,
doing this, Bobby.
yep. You're welcome. Yep. Take care.
All right. Bye bye.